With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, myself and Rakesh.
I'm Rakesh. I'm on the product management team at Lightstep and really looking forward to chatting with everyone today.
And my name is Andrew Gardner. I'm in the product marketing team at Lightstep. So what is Lightstep? Lightstep is a monitoring, observability, and incident response platform that enables reliability at scale for DevOps teams around the world. Built by the team that launched observability at Google, Lightstep has been driving intuitive cloud-native observability to immediately identify and understand every change in the complex cloud-native apps that power businesses since 2015. And in 2021, we were acquired by ServiceNow. Lightstep empowers app dev and SRE teams to deliver constant innovation and outstanding customer experience, understanding and resolving complex issues across any number of services, platforms, languages, or teams, and to collaborate to resolve issues in real time. So we're here today to talk about our latest update to the Lightstep platform, Lightstep Notebooks. Lightstep Notebooks are designed to enable SREs and developers to mitigate incidents quickly and proactively to prevent recurrence, maintaining a reliable experience for end users. In just a moment, Rakesh is going to walk through a typical investigative flow within Lightstep Notebooks. Over to you, Rakesh.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm going to start by talking about how notebooks came about, the problems that notebooks solve, and the role that it can play in your investigations, and a little bit about how it works at a high level with these slides, and then we'll go ahead and jump into a demo. So where did we begin? We started by developing a really strong understanding of what the process of investigating change looks like. And that would be independent of any particular system or observability solution. And so how do we do this? We talked to experts, both within Lightstep and in our customer base. And we also read a lot of research and just immersed ourselves in troubleshooting best practices for distributed systems. And from there, we constructed a high-level framework for what investigating a change looks like. And it turns out that, and this is no secret to many of you on the call, that investigating a change is a recursive process of forming and testing hypotheses that help you isolate the problem. Where is that problem in your system? And eventually arrive at an actionable conclusion on how to restore the system back to health. So once we had this framework in mind, we then started talking to our customers. And so we asked you, when you're investigating an incident, what's hard for you? And using the framework that we developed, we were better able to understand what you were telling us. So here's just a really high level, some of the things that we heard from our customers. So number one, it's really hard to test hypotheses. So sometimes you might not have enough data since your solution might have a limited recall window, sometimes as small as maybe even just a few minutes. But even when you have lots of data available to you, the data, just having the raw data isn't enough. You also need to be able to summarize it, to visualize it, to interact with it in an intuitive way, to be able to understand exactly what it's saying. It's also hard to form a good hypothesis, which is something that customers consistently told us. So sometimes when you're investigating, you just get stuck along the way because you've tried a bunch of things out and there's no clear next step. There's no real smoking gun. And sometimes for a really complex issue, and those complex issues tend to be some of the ones that have the greatest impact on your end users, it might not even be clear where to start in the investigation. We also heard from customers that it's hard to bring other people into your investigation. So investigating a change is very much a collaborative activity, not a solo activity in most cases. And so when you bring other people into your investigation, they need to be able to know where you are, like where your investigative process has taken you and what your thought process was, so that they can be helpful to you and they can actually bring in and support you during your investigation. And finally, one of the really strong, consistent themes that we heard from customers is that it's hard to construct the full narrative of what happened once you figured something out, once you isolated the problem and were able to take some sort of action that restored the system to health, you then want to go into a postmortem, and that requires having a really good understanding of what happened so that you can share that understanding with folks in the postmortem and really address the root cause. And just constructing that narrative is also a challenge. And when you look at it, and just these summarized at a really high level, all of these problems contribute to MTTR, and that ultimately means pain for you and your customers. So now let's look at what notebooks can do for you. We've been iterating on notebooks for over a year now. And so with all that time in the hands of our customers, we've been able to make lots of different iterations. And we've really packed it with a lot of useful features that can power your investigative workflows. So at a really high level, here are some of the things that you can do with notebooks, and you'll see how they can solve some of these problems that our customers have been telling us that really plague their investigations today. So the first thing is that you can test hypotheses by querying across all your telemetry, your metric and span telemetry, and generating a lot of different types of visualizations. And so with Lightstep, you can query across 100% of your span data for the last 3 days. And even more retention is coming soon. We've also built a powerful but intuitive unified query builder and visualizations like time series graphs and heat maps, with more on the way, including a dependency diagram, which is something that's been very requested by customers. You can also, with notebooks, you can form good hypotheses by having Lightstep generate really powerful correlations for you when you need help. So we've built a deviation analysis tool that you can run on any graph where you see a deviation. You can also share a snapshot, like a read-only snapshot of your current state, where you are in your investigation, so that other team members are much easier to be brought in to the investigation. And finally, you can document all of your findings, all of your investigative steps. Notebooks has a bunch of features that make that really easy for you so that you can share that understanding of what happened and that narrative at a postmortem. So there are a couple features we'll touch on, like text blocks and annotations and things like that we'll walk through. So now let's see what this looks like in the product. So here we have a notebook with a few charts in it. You can see we've already populated it with a few charts. And in this scenario, I'm investigating a spike in latency on the warehouse service. I've added titles and descriptions to both the notebook and the charts to help both me and others eventually understand the context behind this investigation and behind each chart. And so that's going to be really useful later, as we'll see. I've also starred this notebook because I think that this notebook is going to be important to reference later. And you can see over on the left that my starred notebooks show up at the top of this pane, but I can also search across all the notebooks, and you can see that there are over 100 notebooks here. So I could still easily find this one, even if I didn't star it. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this first graph, warehouse latency. So we can see from the legend here under the graph that it's showing spans in the warehouse service. And if we expand this legend, we can see that there's 4 time series. So for the P50, P95, P99, and P99.9 latency of those spans. And that's what this graph is showing. You can also see a bunch of green dots on the graph, and you might be wondering what those are. So let's hover over one of those and see what it is. So each of these green dots are individual traces that you can actually click on. They'll open up the detailed trace view that we have for each of these traces. And so the idea here is that if you see a bunch of traces that have high latency, you can click into those to see exactly what happened for that particular request. So we make it really easy for you to find any of those smoking gun traces if they're there. But if this is a distraction, or if you just want to see the time series, you can also turn off those trace examples if you just want to see the time series. So you can see that with this one graph, we've packed in a lot of data in an intuitive way with time series as well as with those trace example dots. And all of those together, they help you better understand the overall shape of the problem that you're dealing with and pointing you to specific examples of that problem. So now let's pause for a second and think about, so where did this graph come from? Like how did it come to appear on this notebook? So there's two broad ways in the product of how you can add a chart to a notebook. So the first is, let's say that you saw this anomaly on a dashboard or an alert chart, and you wanted to ask some questions about it. And so it's really easy to directly add any dashboard or alert chart across the product that you see to a notebook. You can also create this query from scratch. So you can come to notebooks and start with a blank slate if you're inclined to do that, as many of our users are. So let's go ahead and open up the query builder that we have here for this particular query and see what we can do here. So you can see that this query is it matches exactly what this legend has said. So spans with the warehouse service. And what else can you do when you build a query? So you can change the time window. You can specify a particular time window that you want to search for spans. You can also, you build your query by adding attributes and attribute values to filter the query. And you can add as many filters as you like. You can change the operator for each filter as well. So we have a bunch of different operators that we support. You can also change the visualization type, and we have a couple of different visualizations with more on the way. And you can also add a group by as well. So let's go ahead and close that up and return to our investigation. So back to where we were. So I've seen this spike, and now I want to form and test a hypothesis on this data. So this data, again, is the latency across the entire service. And now I'm starting to wonder, is every endpoint in this service experiencing degradation, or is it just a few endpoints? And how can I test this hypothesis? So one simple way that you can test that hypothesis is to modify this query by adding a group by on operation, which is what I have gone and done in the next chart. So let's go ahead and open up the query builder again, and you can see that the original filter is still in place. So it's the same as the previous query. We're looking at the warehouse service. And what's different is that now I've grouped by operation, and I've also just turned off all of the percentiles except the P95, just to make the chart a little bit easier to understand. And so let's go ahead and look at this graph. So what is this graph telling us? So each of the time series that you see is now the P95 of a particular operation in this service. As you can also see by the table. So we've got all the different operations in this service. We're graphing the P95s, and these are reflected here. And so what can we tell from this graph? So it looks like every operation has experienced some sort of slowness. From the point where this anomaly started to occur, there is degradation across the board. But it does appear that some operations are much more severely degraded to the point where, so for this operation, the latency used to be less than a second, and now it's approaching 3 seconds. That's to the point where a user might notice. That might start to be violating your SLOs, and you might want to take a closer look at that. So from this point, now that we've we've formed a hypothesis and we've tested it, and there does seem to be some interesting insights from that, there are a few next steps that I might want to take here. So I might want to look at individual traces that went through this really degraded operation just to better understand the call structure of those traces and where that increased traffic might be coming from. And so we can do that by clicking on any of these dots that we see. I might also want to query the individual operations some more, and maybe add some attribute filters. Maybe there's some subset of traffic based on where it's coming from, or some particular infrastructure that's serving that traffic that I have as span attributes. And I may want to filter or group by on those attributes for a particular operation, so that I can really try to isolate the issue further and start to identify remediating actions. I might also want to look into the resources of this service, because even though some operations are degraded more than others, the whole service, as we saw, all the operations have experienced some type of degradation. So maybe there's an issue with the resources, the infrastructure that this service is running on. And so all of those next steps I can do inside notebooks. So now let's say that you're working on a team, you've been doing this investigation on your own for a while, but now you want to bring in a teammate into the analysis. So first thing to notice is that there are multiple charts in this notebook, and you can add as many charts as you want to a notebook. So each of which might capture a specific investigative step that you took. And again, notice how the notebook itself has a title and a description, and each chart has a title as well. You can also add a text block in between charts to provide additional context on your investigative process that could be really useful for someone that is coming into this notebook for the first time. So once you've used all of these tools and you can edit the descriptions and titles and add these text blocks, now that your notebook is ready to be shared, we've made it really easy for you to share your notebook. But also, one thing that's really cool is that you can share a read-only snapshot of this notebook. So let's say you're still continuing your investigation, you have some more charts that you want to add to it, but you do want to capture your particular thought process at a particular point in time with somebody. We make that really easy for you to do that. So now when someone opens this link, they're going to see a snapshot of where you were in the investigation at that particular point in time. So let's go ahead and open this snapshot. So you can see that it's basically all of those same queries, but now instead of the query builder, we just replaced that with a read-only query description. So this snapshot is locked for editing, and it captures exactly what you were thinking at that moment in time. So somebody can really easily understand that. My teammate that I've shared this with, they can also duplicate this snapshot into their own notebook. So you can go ahead and do that here. And so then they'll have all of these charts, but in their own copy, so that they can continue investigating. So now let's go back to this notebook. There's one more thing that I'd like to show you. So let's say that going back to this investigation, let's say that I've done a few more steps in my analysis, and I've tried a few more hypotheses. Maybe I've isolated it a little bit more, but I still haven't gotten to some actionable step that I can take to really restore the system back to health and get back to where we were. So I'm completely stumped at this point. I really don't know what to query for. I've run a bunch of different queries. Whatever the answer is, I'm not able to get it on my own. And that's okay. So we have a really great feature that can help you get unstuck in these situations. So you can use this analyze deviation feature and let Lightstep generate a ranked list of trace-based correlations for you. So the way that this works is you hit analyze deviation, you select the period in which the deviation occurred that you see, and then you hit analyze. And now you let Lightstep do all the work for you And we are basically looking at all of the spans across all of the traces that match your span query. So we're not just looking at the spans that you queried for. We're really looking at everywhere across all the requests that came in. And so what you see here is a list of correlations, and they're ranked by the magnitude of change between the deviation period that you selected and the baseline period that we automatically determine. And for each of these correlations that we found, so you can see what we thought was the most deviated correlation, or the most interesting ones have bubbled up to the top. You can see supporting evidence for each correlation as well. So let's go ahead and open up this top correlation here. And what this is saying is that the customer pro wool has started calling an endpoint that is far upstream of the service that I was actually investigating. And that has caused a cascading set of issues downstream. So there is a lot of functionality on this page, which I'd love to go over, but it's out of scope for this webinar, but we'll definitely be covering it in the future because there's a lot of really exciting stuff here. And so that's all I've got for you today. So we've shown how, just to recap, how the many features of notebooks can really come together to streamline your investigative workflows. And so this helps you form good hypotheses, test those hypotheses with intuitive and interactive visuals, share your findings with teammates during an investigation, and help you construct the narrative of what happened so that you can present in a postmortem. And all of those things are in the service of ensuring reliability of your services and also reducing MTTR.
Thank you very much for that, Rakesh. Now let's get to some of these questions that have been coming in. The first question we have is, what if I want to filter by regex?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go back to the notebook here. So I had mentioned that there are attribute filters that you can build on your query, and the default filter is equals, but we also have matches regex and does not match regex as well.
Cool. Next one is, what if I want to visualize the distribution of the data?
Yeah, so this is a really important aspect of notebooks and kind of like the philosophy of Lightstep in many ways, because we always say that performance is a shape, not just a number. Well, what we have here on this line chart is just a few different percentiles, but just those percentiles alone doesn't communicate the shape of the latency. And so you can actually change the visualization type to a heat map. And what this is you can kind of think of it as a histogram turned over sideways. So it's vertical and over time. So you can see the shape of all of the requests, of the latency of all the requests coming in, and how that shape has changed over time. And so with this heat map, the darker regions indicate regions of greater density for that particular latency value.
I love heat maps. Actually, while you're going through that, a question came in. Maybe could you just give a brief, explanation of P50, P95, P99, the percentiles you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so we're searching for spans in the warehouse service. And so all of those, so there may be thousands or even millions of spans, and all of them have a latency value in this particular time period, and basically all the parameters that match the query. And P50 just means, like, if you order all of the spans by latency, what's at the 50th percentile? Same with 95. So what is the what is the latency value such that 95% of the spans are lower than that and 5% of spans are higher than that?
Cool. We have a question about the read-only snapshot. The question is, could someone circumvent the snapshot, access the notebook through the notebooks menu, and start to make changes? It sounds like a permissions thing here.
Yes, so they can do that today. That is for sure. So if you are, unless you are a viewer, so if you just have the viewer permission, then you would not be able to edit the notebook. But if you have any of the other permissions, you would be able to edit the notebook. And a more robust permissions model is definitely something that we're working on, but we think that the snapshots and pointing users to those snapshots is a way to still have that, to still give somebody that read-only option, even if they're not a viewer.
Awesome. Thank you, Rakesh. And thank you everyone for joining us today to learn more about Lightstep Notebooks and how they can transform your troubleshooting journey with Lightstep by enabling SREs and developers to mitigate incidents quickly and proactively to prevent recurrence and maintain a reliable experience for your end users. Thank you very much.